let's start with just a really quick review of the legislative branch of the federal government, aka Congress. I know we went over this, but if it's been a minute, just make sure everyone understands what Congress looks like. It is composed of two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate has 100 senators total, two per state. So California, one of the largest states in the country, has two senators, and Montana, one of the smallest by population states in the country, also has two senators. And they serve very long terms, relatively 6-year terms. And because of this, the Senate tends to be a little more moderate, right? You have, you represent half the state. And so you have to appeal to a really broad swath of people with various backgrounds, various political beliefs, and you tend to stay there longer. So you develop a little bit longer, a little bit better relationships with your fellow senators, and you don't spend as much time worrying about reelection. You get in, you have 6 years before you get voted on again. So you have time to just sit down and really get into the work as a senator. So for these reasons, you see the Senate as sort of, the more, mature chamber. The people tend to get along better. They tend to be a little bit more moderate than their counterparts in the House because of the structure of the Senate. And then we have the House, the other side of Congress. There are 435 representatives in the House, and this one is apportioned by population. So California is going to have way more representatives than Wyoming in this case. And so because of that, California has way more than two senators. Your district as a representative is much smaller, and you tend to represent more like-minded people. So you might have a smaller group of really conservative constituents, or really liberal or progressive constituents. They might have much more specific issues. So if they live near the ocean in the south, they might be more concerned with climate change. Or if they live in a very agricultural area, they might be more concerned with issues pertaining to that. If they live in a city versus living in a rural district, because as a representative, your district is smaller, you tend to be a lot more focused on the individual needs versus the senators who are focused on almost the entire state. And so because of that, you tend to see a more partisanship in the House, and with the representatives. They tend to be at various parts, along the spectrum of the political spectrum, versus the Senate, which obviously there's differences, but it just tends to be a little closer to the middle, whereas the House, you kind of get the whole spectrum, political spectrum. They are 2-year terms, which is not very long. So the House is constantly shifting over. And as soon as you get there, you're already starting to think about your next election. So the House tends to be a little more focused on making sure that they are doing things or saying things that are going to get them noticed and elected or reelected by their constituents. So it tends to be a little more bombastic than the Senate, for example. And because it's cycling in and out a lot more, maybe you don't have the same level of relationships that you have in the Senate, which is a little bit longer lasting. So I bring up those characteristics because we're going to talk later about what are some of the roadblocks in getting legislation passed. And so understanding sort of how the chambers look and why they're different will really help you understand maybe why we don't have regulation in some area or why it's so hard to get it. And again, these are directly elected by the citizens of their state. So they're trying to directly reflect what the people who sent them to Congress need and want and care about. And they do that through, among other things, through legislation. So let's look at the process of passing legislation. Okay, so we talked about the role of Congress. The role is to pass legislation and set big, broad policy goals, policies and goals for the nation. And remember, they are supposed to work in their enumerated powers that are listed in the U.S. Constitution. So they're supposed to work in very specific areas. But as we know, that's been broadened over time. So Congress is the only level of federal branch of the federal government that can pass laws. Only Congress has the authority to pass laws. To the extent the executive branch, exerts authority, it is because they got that authority, from Congress or directly from the Constitution. But Congress's role is to pass legislation. So what are the steps in passing? So the first is you introduce a bill, which is, a draft of a law that you want to pass. And it's in complete form. It could technically be, enacted as is, but it's probably going to go through changes. But it has everything that a law should have. And any member of Congress can introduce a bill in the House or the Senate, but a bill must be approved in both chambers in the same form in order to become a law. So the House does not pass laws by itself. The Senate does not pass laws by itself. The two of them together must pass the identical law for it to move on to presidential action. So any member of Congress can introduce a bill, but they can also join together to introduce a bill. So person A from California can introduce a bill themselves, but they can join up with person B from Texas or person C from Minnesota. And sometimes that makes the support for the bill that much stronger when it looks like lots of different people from different areas are interested in this bill. You can also have, Congress people from different parties introduce a bill together. And so we call it a bipartisan bill. And it means someone from the Republicans and someone from the Democrats together came to introduce this bill together. And again, it really shows that there's support from both sides, and it makes other members of their political party willing to get on board when they see someone from their party has introduced the bill. So first up is introducing the bill. And again, you need to do it in both chambers. You can do it at the same time. You can introduce it in the House and in the Senate at the exact same time and let them go through the process together. Or you can introduce it in one and let it go through the process and then take what came out and introduce it in the other. It's kind of, you see both. So once the bill is introduced, it's going to go to the relevant committee for study. So here you can see all of the different committees. You've seen this graphic before. On the top in the blue are all of the committees for the House of Representatives. And on the bottom in the red, you see the committees for the Senate. And then purple, there are some special or joint committees that exist between the two. And so, a bill's introduced, and it goes to a particular committee that is made up of a certain number of representatives who have, been getting expertise in that area, or they see all the bills in that area so that they can be, they can think comprehensively about what's the total package of bills we're going to pass. So for any transportation-related bill, it's going to go to the Transportation Committee, for example, and they'll see all the different bills that are pertaining to transportation. So that way you don't have the entire Congress considering every bill. It's not efficient, right? You need to break up into groups. So it goes into committee review. They're going to hold hearings. Maybe they look at the bill and they decide they want to hear from different people that are stakeholders. So if it's a transportation bill, maybe they bring in industry. Maybe they bring in automakers, or maybe they bring in, some people from think tanks or academics, and they can hold hearings. We've seen like Sam Altman, that was at the beginning of when you do the section on AI, you'll see that that it starts off with a hearing in which Congress is trying to legislate about AI regulations, so they bring in the CEO of OpenAI to ask questions. And it's just fact-finding right? It's, what do you think about the issues? What would you think about this law if we passed it? It's because they're trying to get information so they know if this bill is good as it is good the way it's written, or if they need to make changes. So they will hold hearings, they will bring in relevant witnesses, ask them questions, learn more. They're the staffers, who are basically the people that work with Congress people, sort of their research team, will do research and report back to the Congress people, to their own congressperson, about what they found, and they will take all that information and they'll start proposing different amendments. Right? They'll take the original bill and say, okay, based on what we've heard or what we've read or what we've found out, we probably need to change a few things. And they'll work together as a committee to make the right amendments to get this bill in a place where they think it makes sense, and also in a way they think will actually get the votes that they're going to need later. So once the committee gets the bill in a good shape for them, they move the bill to the floor. And that means they take it back out to the broad chamber. So if this was a transportation committee in the Senate, they get the bill, they feel like this is in good shape. Now they bring it to the rest of the senators so they can discuss the bill and debate it. So you see here in the bottom, that's what it looks like when they take a vote. So they can read the bill out loud, or they can give it to the rest of the senators or representatives ahead of time and let them read it on their own. And then ultimately they'll debate it. They might have different, Congress people get up and make statements about what they like about the bill or don't like about the bill, try to convince their fellow Congress people one way or the other. And then ultimately it will come to a vote. And so what you see there are the tallies of the votes, and they will be listed out by political party. Our two political parties are Democrats and Republicans, so you see those two, and then independents, all the other different parties. And you can see here, this is a very partisan vote on whatever this was. We had all of the Democrats vote yes, most of the Republicans vote no, except for 4, and this one won. So it was 76 to 68. And you also saw on the right, the NV is they didn't vote. They didn't vote. And so that's what it looks like for a floor vote to happen. So once they take a vote, it's either passed or it's not passed. So there are not enough votes here to pass it. You need at least, in the House, you need 50%, more than 50% to pass. In the Senate, it's a little bit complex. So it can be either 51, so a little bit more, a majority, or sometimes it's 60. I won't get into the complicated nature of the Senate. Just know that the bill needs to pass in order for it to make it to the next stage. We would be here all day if we started talking about the Senate. But you either way, you need a lot of people. You need more people on your side than not on your side in order for these to pass. And so the bills that pass, they need to be passed by both sides of Congress. If they are a little bit different, then we go into the process where you see conference committee. So hopefully they're the same. And that's why it's kind of sometimes better to let it go through one, well, I guess I don't know if it's better, but you'll often see them go through one chamber of Congress and then take that finished one and send it to the other side and then let them go through the process, versus starting off with two kind of rough drafts and hoping that they end up the same. And so, but if they happen to pass, so say either way, say you start in both chambers and you go all the way through the process and they're passed, but the bills look a little bit different, or you start in one chamber, say the House of Representatives, and pass it and send it to the Senate, and as they go through, they make their own amendments and then get to the end. Either way, those two bills are different, and now they need to go to a conference committee to work on getting the bill in a final form. So this committee it's a temporary committee. It's not a standing committee where someone's always on it. They will create this committee for this specific bill. And there are leadership from both chambers. So the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader will appoint the different people that will be in the conference. So you have some from the House and some from the Senate. And typically they're going to be from the committee that ultimately worked on the bill, because they have expertise at this point. They've been sitting through the hearings. They know why they made the changes that they made. And so now you've got a committee of senators and representatives working together to try and get this bill into something both sides can agree on. And so they deliberate and they negotiate and they try to reach some kind of compromise in the middle. And so they will focus on reconciling the provisions that are different. So maybe they make amendments, maybe they modify the language in a way that makes the other one happy, and then they eventually hopefully get to a unified bill that they can agree on. And the goal is to create a conference report that contains one final agreed upon bill. And so once that reaches agreement, that unified bill is then sent back to the House and to the Senate for approval. Now at this stage, when they send it back, you cannot amend it anymore. They can debate it if they want, but it can't be changed. And so they're going to vote in the House, vote in the Senate. If one side rejects it, then the bill probably dies. Or you can send it back to conference committee and try and negotiate it a little more. But whatever comes out of that conference committee is what is voted on. And so, okay, now we have a bill that has been approved by the House and the Senate. Either it was approved originally or it went through the committee and they came up with a unified bill that was approved. Now it's sent to the president. The president has to sign, so has to agree with the bill and sign it. The president can sign it, the president can veto it, which is to say I'm not signing it, or take no action. They can do nothing, and then the bill will become law after 10 days if Congress is in session, or if the bill will die if Congress is not in session. So they call that a pocket veto. You just take the bill and put it in your pocket and wait for Congress to not be in session anymore. But you need to have the president on board. If the president does veto it, Congress can still override the veto if 2/3 of each chamber votes yes. So this is much higher than what you need to get it passed in the first place. You need 2/3 at this point to pass it over the president's veto. But it can be done, and sometimes you do see it happen. So that's it. That's how a legislation is passed. It's not on the slide, but there's something called the legislative history that is included along with this, the legislation. And it's just all the things that the Senate, like basically the history of this bill. What happened along the way, what hearings, what did senators and congresspeople and representatives say about the bill, and that we'll talk about later because it can be used to interpret the law after, once it's passed. If there's something vague or something we don't understand or a new situation that wasn't contemplated, we can go back and look at that legislative history to try and flesh out what Congress was thinking when they passed it. So that is how legislation is made.